Jordan Hill, he covers Georgia for Dogs 24/7, and he's on your radio right now. And Jordan, we were just talking about this before our last break, so I'll ask you, what do you expect the designations to be for Georgia on the availability report tonight, specifically with the pair of banged-up offensive linemen from the Auburn game?
Yeah, I think it's going to be something we're all paying attention to as far as Monroe Freeling and Ernest Green. Based on what I've heard to this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Monroe Freeling gets a questionable designation at this point in the week. But the fact he fought through that second half, and I mean, really, he played probably roughly three-quarters of that game against Auburn's a good sign. But I think they want to be smart about his usage. And then, with Ernest Green, I think that's still sort of a work in progress. I think he's a guy that got banged up early in the year. I think they've tried to be really smart about working him back. He missed week 2 against Austin Peay. He started against Tennessee, and then before halftime came out of the game and didn't return. So wouldn't be surprised if Ernest Green ultimately does not play in this game, especially with a bye week coming up before the Florida game, really trying to get him healthy. I do think by the time we get to Saturday, Monroe Freeling will be available again. But that will be two situations I'm going to be paying attention to when the availability report comes out tonight.
How would you grade what Georgia offensively has been so far this season? At times, it looks brilliant, like in Knoxville, and other times, like in the first half against Auburn, it looks rough and frustrating, and then they go on a 9-minute drive to seal the game at the end. So what is this Georgia offense?
And if I were to give it a grade, I'd probably give it a B-, though I really do think a lot of what's been the issue, at least in that Auburn game, was what we were just talking about, an offensive line being banged up. They had Bo Hewley starting at left tackle at the beginning of that game, and all credit to Keldrick Falk at Auburn. I mean, he gave Bo more than he could handle, which is a big reason why Bo wound up coming in this game. And, yeah, this offense to this point in the season, Tennessee game, I thought they played really, really well, which was huge because Georgia fell behind 21-7, had to have a response just to keep up, and they wound up getting what they needed. Alabama, just too stagnant, just too many drives that kind of faded and went to the wayside. But the thing that you kind of have to keep in mind with this Georgia team, for whatever reason, Gunnar Stockton talked about this on Monday. It's a group that just doesn't quit, and I thought that Auburn game was a great example. Nearly going down 17-0, they forced a fumble on the goal line, but then the offense has to start at the 1, and slowly but surely they make their way down the field. And then you mentioned, maybe the perfect example of what this offense is was that drive at the very end of the game against Auburn. 8 minutes and 45 seconds. That was tied for the longest possession in Georgia program history as far as amount of time. Converting, I think, 4 third downs, a 4th down along the way, and that drive, before that drive, Georgia had converted 1 third down all afternoon. So for whatever reason, it's an offense that seems to find what it needs when it absolutely has to need it. When it absolutely has to get it. I know that's not exactly what Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo have in mind, but you do have to give them credit for that. When they've had their back against the wall, when there's been possessions that could be make or break, somehow, some way, they find a way to make the plays, to extend the drives, and ultimately get the points they got to have.
One more on the offense. What would you say, if you said they had a weakness that Ole Miss could try to exploit offensively, what would you say that weakness is?
I think the biggest thing right now is struggling to create explosive plays, especially in the passing game. A lot of what they've done to this point has been quick throws, has been screens. You saw a lot of screens in that game against Auburn, and, credit to Georgia. They timed up some of those very well. There was a 3rd and 7 to Zachariah Branch in the fourth quarter that they wound up hitting and moving the chains. But I think I know I can speak for myself and say that I thought this offense would be a little bit more explosive downfield, what they added to this receiver room and some of the veterans they got back. Now, that's not to say they haven't been explosive at all. Great example, they hit Noah Thomas for a 30-yard pass in the third quarter of that game against Auburn, and then they wound up scoring their first touchdown of the day the next play on a short run from Chauncey Bowens. But that would be what I would look at is, trying to force Georgia into situations where they got to throw it down the field. it's really as simple as trying to stop this Georgia run and especially push Georgia behind the chains on first down, second down. Georgia, it's been very hit or miss on third down this year, and pretty simple to say. The longer the third down, the harder it is to convert. And they ended up 2 of 8 against Alabama on third down, and I mentioned how they struggled on third down against Auburn. I think they started 0 of 6 on third down in that game last week. So if you put Gunnar Stockton in positions where he has no choice but to throw, it could really play out in Ole Miss's favor. And I say that, and Tennessee did that back in week 3, and, give Gunnar credit. He made a huge throw to hit London Humphreys for a touchdown. But that would be my advice on the Ole Miss front. They've got to really stop those early downs, which means the Rebels playing better against the run. I really do think that Georgia's going to try to really rely on its ground game and try to get Chauncey Bowens, Nate Frazier, those backs going. The better job Ole Miss does of stopping that, I think the better Ole Miss's chances of winning this game will be.
On the flip side, because you look at recruiting rankings and what they've just put on the field and put in the NFL, that Georgia has a very talented defense, NFL guys all over the field, but not productive in the quote-unquote explosive play department, not at the bottom or near the bottom of the SEC in sacks and tackles for loss and pressures. Why are they there?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question, and that's something that, we've kind of been following, really throughout this season. I mean, even when they played Marshall and Austin Peay in the first couple of weeks, it wasn't like they racked up a bunch of sacks. And, why exactly they haven't broken through, especially with bringing the pressure, it's hard to say because I think that they've done a pretty good job going into the season with the talent they've gotten. And I think that you look to, especially this defensive line, a lot of talented guys, but it was guys they were counting on to kind of take that next step. I mean, with what they lost to the NFL with Michael Williams, with Ty Ingram Dawkins, with Warren Brinson, some older defensive linemen, all of whom pretty good at rushing the passer and, making plays in the backfield. And for whatever reason, it's just not really, the light really hadn't come on for some of the guys they've looked at and counted on. Christian Miller's the nose tackle, and he's done a pretty good job, but statistically hasn't really done a ton. Jordan Hall has flashed, especially late in games. For whatever reason, he's been able to really turn it on. Some good plays here and there from Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. Elijah Griffin, who's a true freshman, has flashed, but no one's really dominated. And I think, the position where you can really see, the losses to the NFL, and especially, just with how the portal works today, that, guys that move on who would have had bigger roles, outside linebacker, Quintavious Johnson's just a sophomore, and I think in the last couple of weeks he's looked better as far as pressuring the quarterback, but he still hasn't gotten home. Compare that to a guy like Damon Wilson, who was at Georgia last year, and I think he might lead the nation in pressures. I know he had a fantastic game for Missouri against Alabama last week. That was a really big loss for Georgia in the portal. There's talent there, but they, for whatever reason, have not been able to be consistent. And I know one thing, and just what I've watched of Trinidad Chambliss, you've got to make him uncomfortable. You've got to make him force throws and make mistakes. If he has all day on Saturday, that does not bode well for the Bulldogs.
So is that I'll ask you the same question on the flip side. We got about a minute and a half left here. What would be – is that their biggest weakness that they can exploit, is that they're not able to get after the passer?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that combined with what's been – at times a shaky secondary, I think that's what Ole Miss has got to look to exploit. It's got to, create explosive plays down the field with Trinidad. And I think even, too, taking advantage of his legs and taking advantage of his ability not only to extend plays, but maybe run some design runs, take advantage of what he's able to do. Traditionally, when you look at Georgia's defenses and the times they've had issues with quarterbacks, been guys that are dual threats. It's guys who can keep those plays alive, who continue to look downfield, and if they got to tuck it and run, they can tuck it and run. So, either allowing Trinidad to run or also, extending plays and testing a secondary that has been hit or miss this year. Tennessee really got the upper hand on them. Alabama, I thought they settled in, played really well in the second half, and had a really good game against Auburn on Saturday, although I thought Jackson Arnold looked pretty flustered in the second half, so that made things easier. So, Trinidad Chambliss, to me, when you look at Ole Miss, I think he's as simple as it is to say, he's the key to this game. How he plays, how he handles his first career road start for the Rebels, and it's going to go a long way in Georgia being able to win this thing, or the Bulldogs really sweating this thing well into the game.
Jordan, outstanding stuff. Thank you so much for your time again, and hopefully we'll catch up with you again down the line. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Appreciate you guys.